And what's ahead for Nokia Solutions and Networks? We're here with three people that can tell us. To my left is Susan Schramm. She's the head of Solutions and Quality Marketing at NSN. Next to her is Dave Debrecht. He's the head of Technology US, also at NSN. And on the end of the desk is Brian Hendricks. He's the head of Technology Policy, also at NSN. And ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here. We had a robust, if you will, pre-show discussion about our conversation today, so thank you for being part of that. Susan, I want to start this discussion with talking about the progress behind NSN in the latter part of 2013, and also what we can expect from your company in this year, 2014.
Well, it's been a delightful year to talk about, because 2013 started as Nokia Siemens Networks and ended as NSN, Nokia Solutions and Networks, as you know, which is the result of a really great statement about the health of our company and our parent company Nokia deciding to purchase Siemens' portion. It also was a year where we really saw some results from our restructuring. A few years ago, we made some rather bold decisions. Some had some opinions whether that was smart enough at the time, but people said, so we decided who we were and who we were not, and we put some bold decisions about being in the mobile broadband space, mobile broadband and services, which meant that we also shed several businesses, and we started a very serious structuring program that affected business lines, it affected our geographic balance, and resulted in us actually being able to really manage our costs, so that we've seen and realized in 2013 the majority of the results of that restructuring. What's magic, and when they write the storybooks about our company and tell this great story, is that at the same time we did not stop in relentless innovation, and so we continued our focus on LTE, gaining market share, having strong positioning in the area of customer experience management, and actually winning lots of customers along the way, which resulted in, globally, we're sitting very well positioned as one of the primary foreign vendors in China in LTE, and here in North America, we've had a series of wonderful progress at T-Mobile in deployment, in US Cellular, and most recently our announcement at Sprint. So we've had a really good year from that point of view. We also were relentless on our area of quality and execution. So it meant that we really do have a point of view that the industry has a call to action when it comes to quality, that it's a really messy space that has a lot of disciplines needed that aren't necessarily being applied in an IP open environment. And so we are very much committed to quality and improving not only our ability to deliver quality, but our carriers' ability to deliver quality as well. So all those fronts progressed, and I'm proud to say we just had our results for 2013. We've been able to now post our 7th quarter of profit in an industry that there were days when it didn't look as easy, but it's a really healthy sign as we start the year. So what do we have for 2014? We're starting with a very, very steady base. We're starting with a company that's very clear about our focus on mobile broadband and services. A company with a portfolio that's extremely focused on delivering high-performance networks to helping the customers solve business problems in the area of mobile broadband. So at the end of the day, mobile broadband is a space that's a technology space, it's a business space, but it needs to make profit. And I think if there's anything that NSN is now very proud of doing ourselves, is making a profit, but also ensuring that what we're bringing to market helps our customers make a profit.
Dave, there's a demand in the industry for 1 gigabyte per day per person.
Correct.
How do you enable your customers to enjoy that?
That's a great question. Certainly there's a lot of technology development in the industry right now. And I would say that the high performance networks that Susan was just talking about, the 1 gigabyte per day that you're mentioning is something that we need to worry about. Let me start by talking about the radio access side. So on the radio side, LTE is the clear winner when it comes to mobile broadband access technologies. But it brought good high day rates compared to previous technologies, but it's not enough. So the next thing we need to bring is LTE advanced features. A couple come to mind, advanced MIMO modes that allows you to increase your capacity of your existing spectrum, and also carrier aggregation that allows you to add spectrum to what you're already using in carriers. Unfortunately, that means you have to have more spectrum, which the FCC is working on right now to try to increase, but that's not something we can worry about right here and now. The other thing I would talk about is on the core side. So on the core network, The real question is, how do we bring advanced features, how do we bring the technology to really give end users a good high-performance experience and yet keep it profitable for the operators? And the answer to that is in the cloud. So cloud technologies and network virtualization is coming. And as they roll that out, you're really going to be able to decrease your costs and at the same time increase your versatility. And once you do that, you can offer the services to the end user at a good price.
Dave, there's so many areas of innovation right now within our industry. What area would you say requires the most innovation right now?
Most innovation right now. I would say that mobile broadband is an area that everybody's going to. It's a converged industry. You have players from the telecom space, you have players from the cable space, or even players from the satellite space. So there's a lot of opportunity out there, a lot of innovation. One specific area that I'd like to touch upon is public safety. Public safety, NSN sees as a big opportunity, but in addition to a big opportunity, we see it as a real need. We have first responders out there in the marketplace using legacy LMR systems that don't offer near the advanced features that the commercial LTE networks provide. So that's an area that we need to bring innovation to those systems to bring the first responders up to speed.
Yeah, I'd like to pick up on that, if I could, just from a little bit on the policy side of things. You have to remember where we're starting from on the public safety side. The history of that ecosystem is proprietary technologies, single source contracts, and a very small user base. Those things taken together give you very poor scale and very poor innovation. If you wanted a feature or a functionality or a new piece of infrastructure, you couldn't reach into the commercial cabinet and pull it out. You had to pay to develop it, which means more expensive systems that cover less. And frankly, that's why we have never gotten systems built in all of the places that we needed them to be built, and we never got the true interoperability. The beauty of the LTE technology that we're deploying is it's an open, standards-based infrastructure technology that is used in many commercial networks. It's going to open up a much larger user base that are currently spending aggressively on research and development to deal with problems like security and congestion in networks. That's going to allow public safety to build a network that covers more areas, has greater functionality, but it's also going to allow them to redeploy some of those important resources to developing features and functionalities to terminate on their own core, which has a couple of real advantages. The first is that they're going to have more capability than they have ever had, and it's going to help a lot with the enthusiasm among first responders and the uptake and the use of the network for them to be able to design in real time the types of features that they need for the first time. There's a great opportunity, as Dave says, for innovation in public safety.
Can you point to, and I know you alluded to this a little bit in your answer, can you point to one or maybe even two specific challenges in deploying the public safety network?
Well, if I could pick up on that first, if you don't mind, real quick. In terms of technology, there is one key challenge we need to deal with, and that's mission-critical voice. That's an area that LMR does very, very well that LTE hasn't done yet. Obviously, voice over LTE is coming, and you can certainly start deploying those networks, and they're doing that right now. But it's not available in mission-critical voice with the features and functions that LMR has. We're doing standard development, and we have made a lot of progress in that area, but we're just not there yet. It's an area we need to work on.
Well,
As an industry, right?
Yeah,
No,
exactly.
absolutely.
I know we're contributing, but it's a real heavy lifting for a lot of different people.
It's
to get it
a
done
big
in a
challenge
timeline.
to the standard, absolutely.
Well, let me add just a couple of things as well that people should keep in mind. The first is that this network that we're building for public safety has to cover and serve areas that commercial networks have never been asked to serve. Difficult terrain, sparsely populated areas, over water, where you'll have first responders will have need to have an access to this type of network. It's a network that's a national security asset that's going to have the highest level of security and resiliency and reliability of any network probably that has ever been built. You're going to have a need to build a network that has a zero failure tolerance, essentially, and to do that
That's
with
more than 5 nines, right?
It's more than 5 nines.
and to do that with a fairly fixed budget. So those are some pretty deep challenges to have to address.
So is there anything that you and your folks over on the Hill can help do to accelerate the deployment of mobile broadband for this public safety network?
Well, I
And
think
it's a loaded question. But
Well, and we as TIA members, exactly.
Well, TIA and NSN have been working very closely with the FirstNet board and technical staff, the government partners, as a valued partner to try to provide a lot of analytical options and solutions. We have the technology, we have the people that can make a big difference here. But a couple of things that policymakers can really do to help the situation. The first is to recognize that in the period of time while FirstNet is working through difficult challenges about what the network's architecture is going to look like, what its deployment framework is going to be, how it's going to procure the technology, we have a real opportunity to do additional pilot and demonstration projects that will work on things that commercial networks really haven't been asked to do. For example, using small deployable solutions that are going to be an important part of filling in coverage in sparsely populated areas. Doing multi-vendor demonstration projects where you'll have, perhaps even in adjacent cells, different vendors providing the technology. So how's the handoff work? How does interoperability work outside of a lab? Those are the kinds of opportunities that the government should look to provide some additional funding and some additional emphasis on over the next couple of months. And then the most important thing probably going forward, in addition to a clear timeline on making some of the decisions that really lets the infrastructure community know what it can plan from a business standpoint, is to really focus on the procurement side. I mentioned earlier on that the old public safety system was one that was predicated on proprietary technologies and single source contracts. That can't be the case in this ecosystem. You have different providers, LTE technology, who are used to working with carriers, where you don't see the kind of contract terms that you do see in typical government procurements, things like liquidated damages and aggressive liability shifting, proposal bonds, things that make it extremely expensive and very risky, especially when you may only be competing for a very small fixed amount of business. What you want to do is structure a procurement framework where you have as many people coming forward with equipment to compete as possible. That's how you get competition, choice, in a whole different innovation ecosystem than public safety has ever seen before.
So they've got to balance a model that obviously protects the government from overspending, all the things that get criticized, and yet have it light enough that people want to jump in and be able to participate. Yeah.
Before we go too far off of that one, though, I just wanted to point out that we have done some trials and pilots as an industry. NSN and our partners and other people have done it as well. The Super Bowl a couple years ago, was it last year? A Republican National Convention, we did things. And what we're finding there is that the public safety users are actually using the LTE network very differently than commercial networks, and how they use it. And video systems, I got somebody that we're watching, check them out on your tablet. So they're walking around with tablets, watching different people throughout the network and with cameras and things. It's just very interesting.
My son walks around the house looking at his tab. I don't know if that's any different.
That is probably true there. But in any event, certainly there's a lot of differences that they need. We need to learn what that is so that we can give them the network that they want to have.
That's interesting. I was just about to ask you that, what you can learn from service providers about the rollout of 4G LTE. Great example. Is there another example that you can give us?
Definitely. There are a number of things. Every LTE network's a little bit different. So a few things that are common to most, and one of them is that usage is always higher than you expect. So don't underestimate it. As soon as you get that device in the user's hands, they're going to consume as much data as they can. So you need to plan for that with more spectrum, with whatever you need to do to plan for that growth. So something to keep in mind. And the next one, Brian's already talked about a little bit, is having a healthy device and application ecosystem. If you close that ecosystem, you don't get the innovation from the outside that you can get. So those public safety users, there's a lot. I was at a convention not too long ago, put on by the Public Safety Association, and what we had was a lot of college students coming and having ideas. I'm going to start a company and I'm going to do this. And by the way, they're volunteer firefighters. So they know how to use it. They're bringing that innovation in, and they're using their technology skills they're learning in school and trying to do them both together. So that's one area.
Creating a healthy ecosystem for specifically public safety.
For specifically public safety.
Does it have to be too different? I mean, does the ecosystem transcend, or?
There's probably some similarities, but there are some very, very key differences between the two. A lot of very, very focused things that public safety needs that most commercial operators or users don't need.
I would only add just a couple of quick points. There's a lot of lessons that public safety can learn from the commercial deployments related to backup power and making sure that you have resilient infrastructure. There have been places that have done comparatively well in the commercial networks, and even in the face of major storms, and there are places that have not done as well. Those are important differentiators to figure out what's worked and what hasn't, because as I said earlier, this is a zero failure tolerance type of network, so they can look at that. They can look at how you get a great amount of coverage with less infrastructure than the public safety systems are used to using. There has been a tendency in the past to overbuild, over-engineer in some cases, public safety systems. And so we're looking for efficiency and economies of scale here in the way they construct the network. And so I think those are important things. And then also, there are, as I said, places where there is a sparse population, rural areas, that are even more critical for the public safety network even than they are perhaps for commercial networks. So every lesson they can draw for how to ensure that you get no diminishment in the quality of the network when you move into more sparsely populated areas are things they should be looking to the commercial provider example.
Susan, at the turn of every year, we ask industry luminaries about what they think is going to happen in the following year, even the next 12 to 24 months. And you typically get the same answer from everybody, whatever that happens to be. But I feel like I can ask you your forecast, if you will.
Now, are we putting money on this forecast?
Not today.
Oh, write it down. Interesting. I have a little bit of a head start because we just, as part of TIA, we just pulled together all the industry pundits from academia, devices, the service providers, startups, and asked that same question. And it was a really interesting exercise because I think depending on the problem statement, you walk in with your own hammer, right? So I came as NSN to the conversation talking about, look, if we build all this cool stuff out in the cloud and there's not quality, we're in serious trouble. So thinking about quality in the cloud, thinking about having to solve this idea of performance when the demand for performance at the user level is so high. So these are real big deals. What I think is the big elephant in the room that we didn't talk about that we need to plan for is the workforce to be skilled to run this.
Sure.
And so what
is that the longer term plan?
That's a longer term. That's a 2 to 5 year issue, but we have two drivers of that, right? So you have new skill sets where you're grabbing from the IT world, right? But the demand for the high performance from a resilience and voice mission critical is not necessarily a skill set. So the learnings between the two industries need to be understood. The flip side is not just youngins that got to know stuff, but also an aging workforce that has a lot of skills, but they're not comfortable necessarily with the new stuff that could be deployed for specific problems. And you've got legacy systems that have to interact with this world, and you've got legacy applications that got to port. So there's I don't know if it's a Y2K scenario where there's a big deadline like there might have been in the past, but clearly the skill sets to do a big jump to this space could be a gating factor, especially unless there's a motive to put investment in it, right? You don't get everybody ready for something that nobody wants to work on. So that's a thought.
Dave, from a technology perspective, and I'd like to push the forecast out a little bit further, what's your 5-year forecast? What challenges do you see coming up, and what are the positives?
Yeah, we at NSN have a clear vision of 2020. We call it our Vision 2020. And what we see is the need for 1,000 times the capacity of today's networks. How do you reach that? What are the technology enablers? We talked a little bit about that at the beginning. Some of them are around the network efficiency, LTE advanced features, increasing capacity to the radio network, cloud technologies to lower the cost for the operator, spectrum availability. That's definitely is going to be a need, whether you get new spectrum or you share spectrum.
It has to be solved.
It has to be solved. The FCC has an ASA initiative trying to figure out a way to share spectrum so you can utilize spectrum by more than one operator. So that's another area. One that I haven't talked about and hasn't been mentioned so far really is small cells. Radio density macro cells are getting congested. So the only way to do and deal with that is either to increase the amount of spectrum or decrease the size of the cells. So there's going to be an influx of small cells over the next 5 to 10 years, and we're going to have to learn how to make those small cells work with the macro cells, multi-layer networks, HetNet, and trying to figure out how exactly that's
This is a
going to work.
management issue as much as it is a technology issue.
So we're going to see that coming into play, and in building, out of building, all those sorts of things within the next 3 to 5 years.
Brian, policy challenges, and again, a loaded question.
Well, there are always policy challenges. Dave alluded to one. Obviously, spectrum is the lifeblood of our industry. And there are no easy choices left, at least as far as the U.S. government is concerned, in terms of how it can free up additional spectrum for commercial use. We have certainly at NSN been deeply involved in the research and development side of this, and also in the regulatory advocacy side, working with the FCC and other partners, for example, in bands that are occupied by government users, trying to find ways that there can be sharing, as Dave mentioned. But it's very clear that spectrum supply has got to remain a key issue, because there's no faster way to slow down the innovation in the mobile broadband marketplace than to starve it of spectrum. The second thing that I would say is we have reached a point where the technology has grown well past where our current statutes and regulations lie. That always provides some with a desire to improve upon that or expand upon that and make regulations fit the new technology. This is brought into focus recently. There's a very important court decision that vacated the FCC's open internet order. One thing that would be really important is to make sure that, regardless of what happens moving forward, particularly in the wireless mobile broadband market space, that operators remain with the flexibility that they need to offer differentiated services. That is going to be a key part of monetization for the operators going forward to continue driving the infrastructure investment and really the bridge to 5G. And then the last thing I would say is to have and promote an intellectual property rights framework that recognizes aggressive companies who do R&D, like Nokia Solutions, have a need to be compensated for their technology that becomes incorporated into standards. And if the system that is promoted does not encourage licensing deals between technology implementers and innovators like NSN, that will be a very, very big drain on innovation, make it very difficult for companies like NSN to sustain, a robust R&D agenda like ours.
With the innovation that we've been doing over the last 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
Just one final question I want to ask is a little bit off our rundown on the left side of our screen for our viewers out there. I want to talk about the word collaboration. We just came off the advisory group meeting for the Network of the Future conference. That's TIA's conference, June 3rd through 5th, again for our viewers. And that word kept coming up. Even a couple of years ago, there were many companies in our industry that were not talking about open networks, open sourcing, open standards. But now they're very much at the forefront talking about that. How important is collaboration, Susan?
Well, I find it fascinating that I think the word collaboration has taken on a very much more dimensional view. As one person mentioned this advisory group discussion we had, is we need taking collaboration on steroids. Well, what does that mean? It's that in the old days, I think we definitely had a predefined definition of who the collaborators were, right? We knew who they were. And collaboration was sort of like the service providers and the vendors who made their stuff that was all siloed. And we would come in, and sometimes it was point-to-point collaboration, sometimes it was a little working group, but it was a lot more clear, right? Now the collaboration is so, the number of people who will affect your network are so varied. Then we learned that with the device impact on signaling, right? Where they had no idea that what they're making these cool little apps, it was like killing our networks. And just the idea of collaborating with people who you don't even know that they're thinking of working on your network. So I'd say the relentless outreach to educate, that's the other thing that we're finding, is that even collaborating with investors so they understand how you measure success in our industry, it changes. It's not measured by the same metrics that you might have measured before. So I'd say inclusive is much more inclusive.
From a technology perspective, Dave?
Yeah, I'm actually going to relate it back to the public safety again, if I can. In public safety space, we've decided to be a mobile broadband company. So there's no way that we or any one vendor can bring an end-to-end solution for public safety. It's just not going to happen. So you have to collaborate with your partners to try to come up with a solution that's going to work. So we have a number of partners, whether that's a partner that is going to be our systems integrator and we're providing solutions to them, or whether that's a partner that in some ways they're almost co-opetition. Yeah, they're a person that we go up against quite often on different from different operators' perspective, and that yet we have to work with them in the public safety space. So just an area that we need to make sure that the vendors are working together and cooperating as much as possible to make the end user as happy as possible.
Brian, is collaboration in your world more challenging than
Across
others?
the aisle, too.
Well, certainly the political process often suffers from a dearth of collaboration and cooperation. I guess what I can add to what Susan and Dave have said is that this is not a new concept to NSN. In the time I have been here anyway, we have been one of the leaders globally in the development of standards, because we recognized long ago that scale was one of the most important aspects to our customers and to, frankly, the survival of the infrastructure vendor ecosystem. And so we're happy when other people want to collaborate and cooperate, and extending that into the policy space means on issues like standard essential patents, on issues like network neutrality, how do all of the players in the space, from the content, over-the-top service providers, application providers, users, infrastructure companies, how do you promote a non-abstract regulatory environment that creates a symbiotic rather than a parasitic relationship, one where we all share in the fortunes of the network continuing to grow, one that promotes value creation in all of those sectors, is one that's ultimately going to keep things growing. And sometimes it's hard to imagine a longtime foe walking arm in arm into a congressional office with you to sit down and say, you know, I agree with NSN on this essential point that we really need to come up with the right intellectual property compensation framework. So it's a challenge, but it's something that we as a company will continue to do and to drive.
And, you know, one thing I think we're going to find is that just forcing ourselves to get so we have common language, that when we come into a conversation, whether it's from an IT versus IP versus voice heritage, or whether it's from the integrator device side, I mean, there's all different ways you walk in the door, public safety versus commercial, that we're using the language the same way, that we know what we're, let's not have this argument, and we're talking about two different uses of the same acronym, you know? So I think there's a lot of early wins in collaboration that can be had.
It sounds like NSN's hot on the trail of a collaborative ecosystem, if you will. That's how I'm going to end this.
Absolutely, great.
Not a plug, just a fact.
Right, exactly.
It's great to have you guys up here and giving us the background of what's ahead for Nokia Solutions and Networks.
NSN, you got it.
I got it.
Thank you.
Again, it's great to have you. Thank you.
Thank you very
thanks a lot.
much.
And for the segment On Demand, please go to tinow.org. So long.